Welcome to our program this afternoon. I am Lex McCusker. I'm the Director of Student Entrepreneurship Programs at GW. Our office provides programming and experiential learning opportunities for students, faculty, staff, and alumni who have an idea and think they want to learn methods for turning their ideas into impactful programs, often in the form of a startup venture of some sort. I'm pleased to be here, and we are certainly happy to be part of the organization that the group that has sponsored this activity today. We certainly live in interesting times. I'm an experimental psychologist by training, and of course I come from a discipline in which large percentages of the research can't be reproduced, and where social scientists produce research that is intended to advocate for a position rather than to find the truth. We live in a time when the press is more likely to be providing spin and narrative support than any kind of unvarnished facts. Present company excluded, of course, Frank. Of course. And so, and many of our institutions are under attack, not the least of which is voting, one of the pillars of our democracy. So I think this is a great opportunity. It's certainly timely. Let's bring in the innovators. That's an American approach to solving problems of this magnitude. And I think we're going to have a great program where folks will talk about some innovative and new ways of thinking about voting and how we might bring some integrity back into at least that aspect of our democracy. Let me then turn the floor over now to Amy Cohen, who will introduce herself and then introduce Frank Sesno.
Thank you so much, Lex. We are delighted to regularly partner with the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and we're particularly happy to be partnering with you on this event. I'm the Executive Director of the Honey W. Nashman Center for Civic Engagement and Public Service here at GW, where our mission is to integrate civic engagement into George Washington University's educational work. And we do that in order to tackle the largest societal problems that we have: poverty, climate change, racism, inequity. And that work, the work that we do, is designed to foster equity and promote active citizenship in our diverse democracy. We do this, we look at public service and civic engagement through a multifaceted lens. We encourage faculty and students to address service and social change through a number of different tools. We look at direct service, social innovation, community engaged research, corporate social responsibility, philanthropy. All of these are all important ways to make change in the world, and they're mutually reinforcing. We can't make lasting change using only one tool, but one tool that is readily available and essential to all democratic governance is voting. So the Nashman Center stepped forward a number of years ago to create and support a GW-wide GW Votes task force, which is promoting voting among all the populations at GW through a variety of different opportunities, through events like this one, through competitions, and through other things. Also, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a groundswell of interest nationally in turning out the college vote. And so GW has been a part of many of those initiatives, including the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, NSLVE, and the All In Challenge, which is a national challenge. We contracted with TurboVote, created through DemocracyWorks, to support GW students' interest in registration and voting. And we'll hear a great deal about this as we move forward in this conversation. But I will say, because I know we have a number of GW folks on with us, that one of the great things TurboVote can do is to help us organize a competition, and we have one going on among all of the schools at GW. Our schools are competing to see who can register the most voters. So if you haven't yet registered and would like to do so, please visit the GW Votes page. You can just Google GW Votes and find the link for your school. Now I am delighted to introduce Frank Sesno. Frank serves as the Director of Strategic Initiatives at GW School of Media and Public Affairs. Prior to this position, he led the school for 11 years as the SMPA director. He is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and creator of Planet Forward, a multimedia storytelling platform that teaches and rewards compelling narratives in sustainability and science. Mr. Sesno hosts the Planet Forward podcast and the annual Planet Forward Summit, where experts, innovators, students, scientists, and decision makers celebrate breakthrough innovations in communication. And it's terrific. Mr. Sesno's diverse career spans more than 3 decades in journalism, including 21 years at CNN, where he served as White House correspondent, anchor, Sunday talk show host, and Washington bureau chief. Before joining CNN, Mr. Sesno worked as a radio correspondent for the Associated Press at the White House and in London. He's won several prestigious journalistic awards, including an Emmy, several Cable Ace Awards, and an Overseas Press Club Award. Frank, we're honored to have you with us, and I'm going to kick it over to you.
Well, Amy, thank you very, very much. It's totally a delight to be with you, and I really look forward to the conversation, and it will be. We'll speak to 2 remarkable students, and we'll speak to a remarkable woman, Jill Brownfield, who is leading DemocracyWorks and TurboVote and all of that. I want to say at the outset, though, just Amy, to pick up on what you were saying, and Lex, what you were saying, how important this civic engagement is, how important it is, the work that you're doing, and how that is brought to such stark relief by the moment that we're living through right now in our history. You know, I started covering American politics here in Washington, I'm sorry to say, when Jimmy Carter was president. I was a very, very young reporter then. And I was covering the White House and other things as we've gone through everything from, Bill Clinton's impeachment to Bush v. Gore in 2000 to, I remember being on the West Front of the Capitol when Barack Obama was sworn in. And I take both professionally and personally, that sense you get when the people speak, and that sense you get when that experiment is in crisis. And those 2 things, our experiment, our democracy in crisis, and the will of the people, are marching in just 32 days toward a moment, a remarkable moment, maybe the most historical moment of decision that we have confronted. So everybody, all of you who are participating in this, all of you who have friends and networks, keep that in mind. I'll make one last point and then go into the introductions. Donald Trump won Michigan, the entire state of Michigan, in 2016 by 10,704 votes. I'm willing to bet that the participants on this call have that number or more of friends, contacts, and connections in their social media networks. The power that you, the individual, have with your own vote and to reach out to others in your networks because of social media and other connections is unparalleled in human history. And especially at a time when our elections are decided by such razor-thin margins, your ability to participate goes beyond just you. And it goes through all these other networks. And it's really, it's an empowering time, but it's also a little scary time. And I mentioned Michigan not to come down on one side or the other of Donald Trump or anything like that, but merely to show what numbers can be. So we have 2 students, and we're going to start with them, Jennifer Garcia and Ruben Roy. And then we're going to hear, as I mentioned a few moments ago, from Jill Brownfield, and I'll introduce her. Jennifer Garcia. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, it's so great to be here.
Great to be with you. You're class of 2022, correct? You're a junior?
Yes.
That's
yes.
Awesome. You're science and English, correct, major?
Political science.
Political science, sorry, political science. I lost my political word there after all of that. Political science and English. And you're a Cisneros scholar.
Yes, I am.
Tell us what a Cisneros scholar is.
Yeah, so essentially Gil Cisneros, he is the congressman in California, and he actually is an alumni from GW. And this program, the Cisneros Hispanic Leadership Institute, he pretty much set up because he said that he saw a lack of Latinx individuals at GW, and a lot of that is due to financial restrictions. So he actually won the lottery.
Yes,
and yeah, and he
won. I think he won more than $200 million.
Yeah, he won a lot of money, but pretty much he wanted to give back to the GW community, and he pretty much funded this scholarship program. And I'm in the third full cohort, and we just got our biggest like cohort group of like 17 freshmen.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's really great. It's like, obviously we get scholarship as well as finance or other employment opportunities and networking opportunities. Danya, who is in this call as well, connected me to this event, and it's just a really great program to be a part of, and
Well,
I'm really happy to be a part of it.
That's great. And I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to let you tell us a little bit more about yourself before we go to questions. But I also want to welcome Ruben Roy. Hi, Ruben.
How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
I'm good. Ruben, your room looks a little dark there. We got to, we'll work on that next time. I'm going to be your producer, and we'll get you some. But we can see you great. So, Ruben, you're a sophomore. You're class of 2023, right?
Yes, I am.
I think I've got the complete phrase with you with science. It's computer science for you.
Yes,
right?
yes, computer science.
And at C, School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. You're from California, is that right?
Yep. So a little earlier up here.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, thanks for bearing with us. And Jennifer, you're from Georgia, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so Ruben, let me let you go first and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll come back to Jennifer and let her do that too. Just tell folks a little bit, 30 seconds about you.
Yeah, so I'm from Danville, California, which is sort of in the Bay Area, but before that I grew up in a small little town called Fallon, Nevada, which is like your quintessential out in the middle of nowhere type of place. And before that I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, so that was a pretty cool experience being there. I've always been pretty interested in sort of technology and how technology can play a role in really important civic issues like, voting. So that was a big part of why I was attracted to GW and why like opportunities at the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the Nashman Center were so interesting to me. Last year I was a Civic House Scholar, so that's like a cohort of freshmen that do a lot of community service and civic engagement. And this year I'm an Upstart Commissioner, so I, along with Danya and some other really great students, all work together to evaluate different student proposals for social entrepreneurship and a social impact project.
Brilliant. Jennifer, give us some more background on you.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Northeast Georgia, like Ruben was saying, a very, very small town. And I was actually introduced to GW through the Posse Scholarship Program at first, and I ended up being a finalist, but ultimately didn't make it. But I did end up getting the Sesno Scholarship, so I'm really happy about that. And kind of like what Ruben was saying, I was very attracted to DC, obviously, because it is the heart of our country, and there's a lot of, like, you always kind of know what's going on in politics whenever you're there, and everybody at GW is so very engaged in like civil engagement, and that pushes you to want to know more. And I've kind of always had, I've always been interested in politics because it's kind of, as a woman of color, I feel like you kind of have to be, because people are making decisions for you. And yeah, I think pretty much, politics is something that I've been interested in, but now more than ever, this year has really shown me how important voting is. And I actually just sent out yesterday my absentee ballot, so I'm pretty happy about that. Good
for you. To everybody here, this message will come across several times: vote early. So Ruben, let me come back over to you, and this is a question that goes to both of you, and that is, and Jennifer, you'll be able to jump right on this because you've already voted. What does your vote mean to you, just on a very personal level? You're young. This is obviously your first time, your first election. So what's that mean? How do you connect to it? What does it trigger in your head in terms of thoughts and emotions?
For me, I think voting really is a chance to like get your voice heard. And I know that like that's become like a little bit of a cliche, but only because like it's so important and so true.
Cliches are cliches because they're off-said, but also true.
Right. And I think that like, especially right now when like, a lot of people don't get the opportunity to vote easily, getting the chance to get your voice heard when you do have that opportunity is really, really important, especially because there are so many important issues on the ballot, especially in a place like California. And it's not just the federal elections. It's not just candidates. Like, we have really important propositions, which are like our direct say on a specific policy. Like everybody's been talking about Prop 22, which is like, do Uber drivers and Lyft drivers get like healthcare benefits? Do they get treated as employees? And sort of removing the level of abstraction between like you vote for a candidate who picks the policies and having your voice directly on like something that's happening in your community is something that's really, really important to me, because that's sort of like my direct say in the place that I live. And I think that that's something really, really important to take advantage of and make a difference in.
Jennifer, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely echo all of that. But personally, I vote because a lot of people in my community, the Latinx community, don't always have the privilege of voting. So like, I know family members, I know friends who are undocumented, who are working on their citizenship. And unfortunately, like going through that period, you can't vote. Even though they're in the United States, they're paying taxes, they're doing everything right. It just feels wrong that they don't have that opportunity. But, you know, I try to use my, like, I'm very grateful that I have the privilege to vote. And I think about those people because oftentimes those communities are silenced, you know, through voter suppression, by the fact that they're not citizens. And I think personally for me, I vote because I feel I need to uplift other silenced communities.
So is that what is driving both your vote and your work to get others engaged and vote?
Yeah, I can talk more about it later, but I worked at this nonprofit that was specifically designed for Latinx individuals to become more civically engaged, because, you know, there's a lot of misinformation, there's some confusion in getting involved politically, and I think voting is one of the greatest ways that you can change a lot in your democracy.
And Ruben, what drives you to get others to vote?
I mean, I'd absolutely build off of what Jennifer just said. It's absolutely the importance of making sure that everybody does get their voice heard. And I think something that is especially true right now is that I think a lot of people have expressed maybe some ambivalence or aversion to like the two primary candidates in the presidential primary, but really emphasizing that like in the end, that is just one of the many races that's on your ballot. There are so many more at the state and municipal level that might even have a more direct and immediate impact on your community depending on how you vote in them. So I think that reinforcing that's really important.
Have you both encountered your friends, you know, roughly your same age, and you said, go vote, and they say, oh, it doesn't make any difference, and they're all lousy anyway, and it's not going to change a thing. Have you heard that?
Yes,
And what do you say? So all right, I'm that person. All right, Jennifer, here we go. We'll role play here a little bit, okay?
mm-hmm.
Oh, Jenna, it's not going to make any difference. One vote.
Well, I mean, if your vote didn't matter, then why would they try to take it away from you, you know? I think it's really important to emphasize, like Ruben was saying, that there's so much more than just those two candidates. I think these past 4 years have shown that. And I think that we need to take into account that, like from my personal perspective, I know people who would die to vote. I know people who would love to have that opportunity to voice their opinions. And for somebody to just for you to throw that away is a missed opportunity. And, you know, in like a couple of years, do you really want to tell your children or your family that, you know, I didn't do anything in 2020? Like, do you really want to be that person?
Okay, Ruben, talk to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was absolutely extraordinarily said. And I would just add to that by, if someone were to tell me that, I would ask, what isn't going to change, right? You said like nothing's going to change. Like, what is that nothing that you're talking about? Is it like the laws? Is it the judiciary? Is it, you know, maybe policies towards climate change? Is it the way that workers are compensated? Because for each of those issues, I promise you, me or you or Jennifer could circle or pinpoint one, maybe federal, maybe state, maybe municipal official whose role or whose policy is on the ballot in this year, right? Or who your ability to vote for them going into the future is on the ballot for this year, because election lines are being redrawn for 2020 as well. And so getting to have your say in those are all like very direct ways to make an impact. And so at a very like high federal level, like, yeah, I get that things might seem like very, very abstract, but pinpoint like what it is you care about that you feel nothing is going to be done about. And I promise you, you and I can like walk through like who's on the ballot that actually makes a difference there and what the best choice for that position is based on how you feel.
Okay, you've both been very persuasive. I promise you I'm going to vote now. Last question to you both, and then I'm going to Jill. So we get the big news today that the President of the United States has tested positive for COVID. Is that going to make your job getting people to vote easier or harder, or doesn't it matter? Ruben, quickly.
Oh, wow. I would say that it probably makes our job maybe a little easier because I think people are starting, like, I really do hope that everybody realized the exigency of like a global pandemic beforehand, but I think that if they didn't, or if they maybe like underestimated the severity of it, depending on where they are or what they're hearing, I think that this might really reinforce that even, you know, an institution that's designed solely to protect one person, which is the president, wasn't able to prevent this disease from infecting him and his wife. And so I think that that might reinforce the exigency and the importance of your ballot.
Jennifer, what do you think?
I definitely echo a lot of that, but I also think it's important to recognize that not a lot of us have the resources that the president does. Some of us live without healthcare, some of us live without a primary care provider. There's so many different things that a lot of us don't have. And so I think that's important to realize, you know, if he does become healthier soon, there's a reason for it. There's financial reasons, there's opportunities to go to the doctor, there's just so many different reasons that not a lot of Americans have, which is super unfortunate. But I think it's something that people need to recognize, and it's something that we need to elect more people who want to uplift individuals like us, like normal Americans who are struggling. It's been a really hard year, honestly, for the entire nation. So I think, I think people definitely need to take that into account, you know, even though, and also just like what Ruben said, this is a disease that it doesn't matter how much money you have, like you can get it.
Well, so, you know, I'll boil it down to a soundbite for you. I'm good at that. I come out of television where everybody thinks in sound bites, right? If there's ever a case where that we needed, where we realize we are all in this together, we're in this together and we need one another. All right, Jennifer and Ruben, I'm going to come back to you a little bit later. We'll have Q&A with our participants. Thank you very much. You've gotten us off to a fabulous, motivated start. And I'll bring in Jill Brownfield now. Jill, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So great to see you. Well, everybody, Jill Brownfield is a, she likes to call herself, I think, sort of a civic engagement nerd. That's a good nerd to be civically engaged about. She's passionate about the intersection of technology and social good. And that's what she does at DemocracyWorks, where she's really the driver in so many ways. She helps get critical voter participation technology literally to millions of people across the country through a bunch of different partnerships, some of which she'll talk about here. She's got a BA in political science, so here, from Stetson University, we won't hold that against you, and a graduate certificate in social impact strategy from the University of Pennsylvania. I understand you're an alum of AmeriCorps. What did you do with AmeriCorps?
Yeah, I was in AmeriCorps in Apopka, Florida. We worked with, my particular role focused on first generation college students, both at the high school level and once they got to college. I also did some work with folks in ESL classes. There's a very large migrant worker community in Apopka, Florida. And so there's a community center I worked with there. So it was a really, really valuable experience for me.
And you're a Florida, you come from Florida, right? You grew up.
Yes.
But you're in California now, so we're seeing you on Pacific time as well?
Yes.
All right, well, that's great. Well, first of all, your response to hearing Jennifer and Ruben just now.
Well, I'm impressed, obviously. It's been a long time since I've been a college student, but I can't imagine being so articulate. I can't recall being so articulate then. And so really grateful for Jennifer and Ruben's perspective and their involvement. That kind of leadership from young folks, it gives me a lot of hope. That sounds cliche, but just like you said, a lot of cliches are said because they're true, right? So right. I really appreciate them sharing so much with us.
Okay, and before we go into what you're doing and the importance of voting, I mean, I just can't imagine starting our conversation with asking, I mean, I woke up this morning and heard that the president tested positive, and it was, you know, it was just an astonishing thing. I wonder what went through your mind. You're trying to get people to vote in the middle of certainly what is the most tumultuous campaign of my life, and probably of modern American politics. What did you think when you heard about this?
Yeah, I'm actually, last night I went to sleep having just heard that a close friend of mine is in the hospital with COVID. And so when I woke up this morning and saw that the president and first lady also tested positive, my heart did sink from an already sunken place, I think. And so I think so much of 2020 is unprecedented. We've heard this a lot. And as you know, Jennifer and Ruben spoke to this very well. And I think the only thing that I would add is just, there are so many things that feel extremely urgent right now. And now one thing to add to that is the urgency around the president getting back to health.
So let's talk about voting. I mean, this is what you do for a living. You try to inform people about why votes matter and how they can vote, and you try to make it easier for people, bringing technology. You're an innovator in that sense, and we'll be getting to that a little bit later on. But let me start with the very most basic question here, which is, why does it matter? And I was asking Jennifer and Ruben, what do they say to skeptic friends who say, oh, I'm just one vote, it doesn't matter, I don't like any of these people anyway, they're all insiders, nothing changes. I'm sure you've encountered all of that. What's your response?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jennifer and Ruben both made really great points. One thing that Jennifer said that really stood out to me was, Jennifer said that elected officials are making decisions for us. And that really stood out to me. Ruben also, the point that he made about how every single kind of issue that people care about, he could go through and trace why someone's selection on the ballot matters for that issue. And so those are two really, really great points with regard to why voting is important. It's one of the most clear-cut ways in which we can play a role in shaping our communities. On top of that, we know that politicians chase votes. And if young people don't vote or anyone from a specific group doesn't vote, politicians won't chase their votes. It's cyclical. And we know the way that politicians chase votes is by talking about the issues that those voters care about. And candidates more recently have been speaking directly to young voters more than I can remember happening in previous years. And it's because young people are showing up. We saw historic young voter turnout in 2018. And so I think that there's evidence of that kind of politicians chasing votes and breaking out of that cycle a little bit.
Well, Jill, I wonder too how you might connect a couple of other dots here. I mean, we've seen young people with this extraordinary ability to mobilize and organize, whether it's through the Black Lives Matter movement, the climate strike movement, or March for Our Lives, the sort of gun violence student movement that was born out of the Parkland shooting. And so do you think there's some sense of empowerment that has come through all this, and can you connect that to the vote directly?
I think so. I think there is a lot of empowerment that I've seen coming out of Gen Z in general. One thing that I've also seen though is that Gen Z does not like to be patronized. They don't like to be kind of told who to vote. I remember seeing this piece written by a Gen Z journalist talking about how Gen Z doesn't need celebrities to tell them to go vote. We're a little more substantive than that. And so that's also really been impactful for me when I try and kind of learn about, okay, well, what kind of messaging is going to work to mobilize these voters? And so I think, that there's a lot of unique nuance we have to apply with our messaging. And I think it kind of comes back to the issues that they care about and tying those issues back to elected offices. A lot of folks might not be interested in a district attorney election until I tell them that the district attorney determines whether or not police that are involved in, shootings are prosecuted. And so, tying those races back to specific issues, especially at the local level, I think can turn that empowerment that we've seen from Gen Z into action in the voting booth.
So we're here talking about civic engagement and innovation. How do we bring innovation? Can we bring innovation into civic engagement? I know you work in the technology sphere and you're going to walk us through that. But before you go into the particulars, you believe in innovation, that it can actually change behavior?
I think it can. but I think we've seen innovation also kind of go wrong. And so what I always come back to is really just talking to and understanding the people who you're innovating for. I think, you know, a lot of people look out at the issues kind of plaguing our society without a full understanding, and they build something that isn't necessarily what's going to actually solve the issues. And I think that that is because they didn't talk to the people who are most deeply affected. And so one thing that like DemocracyWorks has done is we've done usability testing over time, and we've really leaned into doing more usability testing, talking to users, talking to people who do vote and people who don't vote, about, you know, the technology that we're building and how we can improve it. And so I think innovation can be a very, very good thing, but we have to make sure that the people that we're innovating for are part of that process.
So talk to us about how we can be innovative to address voter participation and restore confidence in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that TurboVote aims to do as a platform is help people overcome the barriers that they have to voting. And whether that's a barrier with registration or whether that's a barrier with actually going out and voting or hearing about the elections, that's our approach. There are also organizations that are focusing on reducing those barriers. There are organizations focused on creating barriers to future voter suppression. And so that's really great. And there are a lot of moving pieces in like the voting rights space. And, you know, originally TurboVote was just intended to be an election reminder service. And it expanded from there when we started to talk to the voters and see all of the other barriers that they face. And there's census data that shows that more people don't vote because of process barriers than because of apathy. And so that's kind of a common misconception. And so that's really TurboVote's aim as far as kind of how we're trying to innovate and make voting more possible, more accessible for more people.
Can you show us, give us a little demonstration, walk us through this?
Absolutely.
Now for the multimedia portion of our program.
Yes, now we will rely on the technology gods.
Yes, or as I like to call them, the digital demons.
That's a better name for them. Great, so this is gwu.turbovote.org, the George Washington University specific TurboVote site. They've got a little video here. I won't play it, but check it out when you go and sign up if you haven't already. So wanted to point out a couple of things on the landing page. This tool is available in English and Spanish. And then up here in the top right, if you click help, you'll be connected to our help desk. And we staff our help desk with real human beings to help people get to the polls and get questions answered that they might have. So the first thing TurboVote asks for is your name. And then we ask for your contact information so that we can send you important election reminders. You can unsubscribe anytime. And then we ask, are you registered to vote? I'll go ahead and say no, I'm not sure. So we can kind of see what the voter registration process looks like. I actually used to live in Washington, D.C., so I'm gonna use my old Washington, D.C. address. Just up the street from the Hart Senate building. Great. And so in DC, there is an online voter registration option. I believe 40 states plus DC offer this. In states that don't have the online option, you can still register with a paper form. If I click I'll register online, it actually opens up the direct DC process in another tab. I'll click back over, and then we ask, did you finish the online voter registration process? Let's just click no so we can see what the paper voter registration process looks like. Now it's going to ask me a few questions that appear on the voter registration form, so TurboVote can pre-fill that form for me. I'm going to put in a fake birthday. Where do you receive mail? This is a great option for people who maybe live on campus and receive mail at a campus post office box or something like that. what's your party? And we have state-specific instructions about whether or not you need to register with a party to vote in open or closed primaries. And then we're surfacing the November election, obviously, and then some specific instructions about how DC is handling ballots this year. So, keep an eye on the mailbox.
You're getting this DC information because you put your DC address. So whatever state,
right.
This is going to be personalized to their location that they're putting in here.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a really great flag. And then so it asks, in future elections, you may vote either by mail or at the polls. So for future elections, maybe I want to vote at the polls, and so I'll click that. And then there's an option on GW and all of our other campus partner sites to actually receive the paper form to them physically with a pre-addressed postage paid envelope, which is really helpful. And so there's instructions on that, in that envelope. When you open it up, you'll just sign your form, fill in your ID number, and put it in the envelope we provide.
Does this count as voter registration? I mean, is this I mean, I want to be really clear about this. If someone's not registered to vote yet and they go through this process, is this in effect registering them or not?
So TurboVote walks people through the registration process, but once I say, mail my forms to me, or I'll print and mail my own forms, I still have to submit that piece of paper to the registrar. We provide the mailing address here in order to be registered. Only your election officials can process voter registrations. The goal of TurboVote is to help people walk through that process and give them all the steps that they need to take so that they can get registered.
Got it.
Earlier in the process, you'll recall I went to the DC online voter registration portal. If I would have, completed this process, then yes, I would have registered to vote. I think one thing that TurboVote does, which is really important, is that every time we send a reminder for an upcoming election, we send that about a month ahead of time. And we encourage people to check their voter registration status before every single election. And that just makes sure that, people are registered with all of the details that are accurate. So if their name changes, if they move, if they want to change their party affiliation, they can do that ahead of any registration deadlines. So it's always good after a few days to check your voter registration status, and so that we have that here on the done step.
But what else do you want to show us from this, Jill?
I think the last thing is just, maybe the voter registration form, just to point out that the ID number is something that you'll still have to fill in, and you'll still have to sign it. We don't collect ID number because that's Social Security or driver's license number, and that's sensitive data. So when you get this form, either in the mail or if you print it out, you still have a couple steps to take to fill it out, but that's outlined here, and it'll be outlined in the welcome notification. But as Amy was saying earlier, there's a competition going on at GW's campus, and so the deans have sent out the link to gwu.turbovote.org, and so make sure you find that email and you go and sign up and get registered. And even if you are already registered to vote, TurboVote is really helpful because we send election reminders all the way down to the local level. So elections next year are going to happen. Elections are evergreen, and so make sure you're signed up so you can be reminded about those.
Let me ask you this, Jill. How does TurboVote and these forms in particular, how do you design them so that they have relevance and sensitivity to different cultures and communities across this country?
That's a good question. As far as the design for different cultures and communities, one thing that we would like to expand in the future is offering additional languages. We have the tool available in English and Spanish. And as I said, we have a robust help desk. And so we have native Spanish speakers on our help desk so that people can get help in their preferred language. It would be great if we could offer additional languages. I know like the County of Los Angeles, where I live, offers ballots and voting information, and I think like 12 or 14 different languages. And so, that's one thing that would help a lot for bringing more communities into the fold with regard to TurboVote. I think the other thing kind of goes back to that usability testing and that user testing, and then our surveys. We make sure that, one of our design principles is to design the tool for the person who's gonna have the hardest time getting over these barriers. Design the tool for the people with more barriers. And so I think, if we come from that space, then we're really using the assumption that the rising tide lifts all boats. And so that design principle, when we go into our usability testing, ensures that we usability test with people who are, facing actual barriers to voting. And
So that's one of the things, one part of this next question, which is, what are some of the innovation challenges and barriers you've had to overcome, both with the TurboVote itself and DemocracyWorks and its partnerships more broadly?
Yeah, definitely. I think the big word that comes to mind with the question of innovation challenges is trust. Building trust with voters, especially in a time where there is a lot of misinformation. We've focused on prioritizing trust with our users, prioritizing trust with our partners. And so working directly with election officials at the state level helps us build that trust. We always do like a robust analysis of all of our research. We have a research team here at DemocracyWorks, and they work directly with those state officials. I think the other challenge that we've had to overcome is building a national level technology for voting and elections, which is run differently at each state or sometimes the county level. And so, we've seen that challenge kind of play out even more as states expand vote by mail, expand early voting options, make changes to how they handle elections, but just for November. And so, DemocracyWorks really wouldn't be able to do what it does without our research team, because that kind of state by state or county by county nuance is, difficult to code into a national system that's supposed to help anybody in the country.
Jill, what is success here? I mean, you've got this platform deployed, you've got a competition, all the rest. So what does TurboVote want to accomplish in this election cycle and broadly?
I think, more broadly, I think we are really aiming for full participation, and that is a moonshot sort of goal. In the past, we've thought about like 80% participation as a great goal. It's not very good for business, but the goal is that nobody needs TurboVote anymore to get registered.
Success means you're put out of business.
Yes, success means I can retire, right?
I like that a lot. I'll retire with you. We'll live happily ever after.
Wonderful.
That we ever get there. All right, well, let me ask you this. All right, so this, this isn't happening in a vacuum. There's a story today that the governor in Texas is limiting ballot drop-off boxes to 1 per county. And there's a lot of concern that that's going to hurt more underprivileged communities because they tend to be in more densely populated counties, and it's just more people trying to get to one place. There are lawsuits, more than 200 lawsuits actually across the country in varying stages that a lot of folks worry. Some say this is going to enhance voting security. That's the proponent point of view. Others say no. Hang on, that puts vulnerable people even more at risk. How does TurboVote and how do you in DemocracyWorks kind of get into this mess and maelstrom that we're experiencing now? If your goal is to get more people voting in this environment, what's happening? This is a darn turbulent flight you're on right now.
Absolutely. I mean, when I talk about barriers to voting, there's a lot of overlap with voter suppression, and voter suppression comes in many forms, from misinformation, long lines at polling sites, voter ID laws, Dropbox laws, and many of those rules actually disproportionately impact students, college students. And so, any and all attempts to decrease voter access by establishing arbitrary barriers to voting is undemocratic, period. TurboVote's goal is to help people overcome those barriers, but again, there are organizations working to remove those barriers.
Are you involved in that? Does TurboVote or DemocracyWorks, are you, amicus curiae on any of these cases, and are you suing on behalf of voting rights, or are you on the sidelines to that?
We're on the sidelines to that, and part of that is because we're a 501c3. So for the tax
We're
code,
nonpartisan.
right? We are nonpartisan. You know, one thing that we've seen with regard to this election cycle and a need we have been able to tap into is the poll worker shortage. And so we've, you know, kind of built out a little task force internally to try and get people to become poll workers. You know, there is a poll worker shortage. We saw this in the primaries, and it has caused polling places to actually close. And so, you know, we've worked with Power the Polls, which is a national level organization trying to get 650,000 people to sign up as poll workers. And so if you're a student and you don't have a ton going on, you know, and might want to be a poll worker, I encourage you to sign up if that's a safe option for you. A lot of the polling locations, the majority of polling locations are implementing CDC standards. And so by keeping more polling locations open, we can make sure that fewer people go to each polling location, right? Because as polling locations close, more people have to pack into one. And that obviously creates issues in any election cycle. But then when you add in the pandemic, you know, it creates also a public health threat. And so,
how are you in DemocracyWorks? And DemocracyWorks is obviously the umbrella organization, and you can talk about that. But working in partnership, building partnerships with community organizations to get better outcomes.
Yeah, we have partnerships with colleges and universities like GW, nonprofit organizations like the Environmental Defense Fund and the Poor People's Campaign, and then companies like Snapchat and Just Water. And each partner gets kind of a unique TurboVote link so that we can do some customization and analytics. One of the benefits of working with partners is that they're often the experts about their audiences. They know what's best when it comes to speaking to their audiences. And what TurboVote can offer is the technology and then, you know, best practices around voter engagement. And so, you know, something we've had to work on with our partners this year is switching to primarily online engagement tactics. A lot of voter registration before this year was ground game. And that has been obviously dialed way back or completely eliminated because of the pandemic. And so we've had to also kind of change the type of support that we give to our partners. We launched an SMS bot focused on helping college students decide where to register to vote, for instance, because there was a lot of confusion around campus closures and where someone should register to vote. So yeah, I think that's the nature of our partnerships is, you know, that our partners kind of come to us with their questions and we give proactive support a lot of the time, but our partners really know their audiences pretty well.
All right, now so let's talk about knowing the audience. That suggests to me, you know, some of the data collection that goes on and what you learn. And I'm going to let you tell all of us that how you're using that data and you respecting everybody's privacy. But talk to us about your data collection and what you're learning from that.
Yeah, for sure. As far as the data that TurboVote collects from users, one really important thing is that every user signs up for TurboVote on their own. We don't upload people into TurboVote. And so that's really important. I think like somebody opting in and then having the opportunity to opt out whenever they need to. We also, you know, our privacy policy is available online and it says we don't sell your information, period. And so I think that's really important too. As far as the data kind of going into TurboVote that goes to the user, so like the data that we collect, a lot of that is done manually. Mm-hmm. So our research team has to call, you know, like the 1,200 county officials in the state of whatever. I don't want to put any states on blast, of course. But, you know, to find out what are the rules and regulations and requirements surrounding the election, and is there still going to be a polling place at Joe's Pizza this year? You know, and so like that work being largely manual introduces a lot of, I guess, just capacity constraints. And so one thing that is always really urgent for us is the accuracy and the timeliness of our data. And it ties back into the theme of building trust with users. So our data coming in from the user going into TurboVote, and then the data kind of powering TurboVote, all of that is focused on prioritizing trust first.
What about voter fraud data?
Voter fraud data.
You have any access to that, or have you, I mean, is there? And I'm not talking about TurboVote necessarily. I'm talking about technology generally. How can we, voter fraud is such a big issue right now, and it's created a really, incredible overhang over this electoral process. And yet technology allows us to understand more about where people vote, how people vote. Can technology also help reassure us or either reassure us that there's very little fraud and how that, and help us identify the fraud where there is?
Yeah, I've done a lot of reading about different voter fraud claims just because, like it says in my intro, I'm a civic engagement nerd, voter engagement nerd. I have a lot of faith in the people who run elections at the local level. I've met a lot of election officials. I've talked to a lot of people who are running the elections at the local level. And, the evidence of widespread voter fraud just isn't there. I do understand, however, the concerns that people have as we expand by mail voting. People want to make sure that their vote is going to make it into the right hands, and they want to make sure that their vote is going to be counted. And so another kind of piece of technology separate from TurboVote that DemocracyWorks offers is called Ballot Scout, and it's basically a tracking function for your ballot. And we partner directly with election officials, again, to provide that tracking. A lot of states are offering ballot tracking this year too. And so, if your state offers that, I suggest utilizing that. But, voting by mail is a secure form of voting. And it is often the safest option for a lot of people, especially in a year with a global pandemic. And so, what we do is we just try and elevate that information. These are your options. And we work directly with the state to make sure that those options are legitimate.
And the we here is TurboVote or DemocracyWorks? What are we talking about? Just to be clear.
Well, DemocracyWorks and that data that our research team collects powers TurboVote, and it powers some other, technologies that we offer as well.
Jill, let's, most of the people in this gathering and in this conversation are probably headed toward being first-time voters. And of course, we encourage them and we applaud you and we cheer you on and we tell you, bring as many people that along for the ride, because everybody should vote. But I wonder what your observations are on the first-time experience and how we can assure people. Some people are nervous about security issues around voting places. Some people may be concerned about, voter rights and suppression and all that. So what does DemocracyWorks have to say to first-time voters? Yeah.
Studies show that if a first-time voter has a positive experience, they're more likely to become a lifelong voter. And that is really important for me. I think in order to have a first-time experience, a good first-time voting experience, part of that is just going into the polling location and feeling confident, and knowing kind of what to expect. And I think that's something that I learned what to expect by going and voting with my mom as a kid, but not everybody has that same experience. And then the voting systems are different in every state. And so when I moved out to California and I voted out here for the first time, it wasn't my first time voting. I was 23 years old, but the process was completely different. And they had this strange ballot marking device where you had to feed your ballot into this little binder that had these two holes and then latch your ballot onto it. And then you used this marker and made a stamp. We don't have that anymore, but it's called Ink-A-Vote. But I had to ask for help from a poll worker, and I was really embarrassed for some strange reason, even though that's the reason the poll workers are there, right? And so even that kind of experience can shake you when you go to the polls. I think it can be a little bit scary for first-time voters or for maybe young folks. I think what I just try and remember is that, you know, poll workers and election officials, they're just people too. They're there to help you. And if you run into any issues, there is an election protection hotline that you can call or tweet. It's 1-866-OUR-VOTE, OUR vote. And then also, if you do run into an issue and you need to vote a provisional ballot, always do it. Always vote that provisional ballot. And then there might be steps that you have to take to make sure that your ballot is counted. You might have to submit a copy of your ID or something like that. But always do it, because a lot of people might say, you know, provisional ballots aren't counted, but, you know, they are. And so it's important to just stay positive when you get to the polls.
It is. I just want to say that I have always found going to vote really an emotional experience. It's really amazing. I remember when I was in college and I cast my first vote, I thought, wow, I got power here. You know, I've been listening to everybody yelling and screaming and all the stuff that was going on when I was in school. And it was for the first time I could step up and I felt like I was actually doing something. I felt like I was registering my voice in a way that I wouldn't be heard like a sound, but the presence gave me just this feeling of empowerment. And since then, I remember when I had kids and I would take them with me and they could look up. I never told them how I voted because I was a journalist, so I was trying to maintain but I thought, I'm doing this for you guys. Like I am weighing in here. I'm not just going to let something go by. Whether I win or lose, I'm doing something here. And you look around and you see people around you, or you talk to others and they have the little I voted stickers, or they've got the ballots that they've mailed in, and you tell stories about that. You feel like you're doing something. You know, people have been to a concert, people have been to a demonstration or a protest or something. You feel like you're surrounded with people. And here, not everybody may agree with you, but it's okay. You're in this together, and you are registering your voice. Last question, and then I want to go to some questions from the group and invite everybody who's watching. Please write up a question. If you've got a question for Jill, we'd like to take some of those, and then in a few minutes we'll bring the students back in. But Jill, I'm interested from your perspective, looking at the technology and what technology can do and what it stands for, at the situation, kind of the seascape of this current election cycle that we're in, and COVID. What effect do you think COVID's going to have, and all this tumult about absentee, mail in, show up in person? What are you looking at? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think right now, election officials across the country are working very hard to make sure that every American can cast their vote securely and safely. And so we saw in the primary, elections get delayed, polling places close, voting options change. And even the day before the primary in April in Wisconsin, it was unclear if the election was even going to be taking place the next day. I'm sure you'll recall. And so that's something where having timely and accurate information from a service like TurboVote can help restore trust and help fight, any kind of like disinformation or misinformation that comes out of there. My thought is, this election, there are a lot of ways to vote, and voters should feel empowered to decide when, how, and where they'll be casting their votes. And they should be able to be confident that that vote is going to be counted appropriately. Early voting is available in a lot more states. Voting by mail is a secure option in most states. And more than 40 states now are actually accepting absentee ballots if you're concerned about COVID. So if that is a reason to vote by mail in over 40 states. And so that's one of the reasons why when you sign up for TurboVote, we make all of those voting options available to you. And so, for me, you were talking about kind of going to the polling location and voting in person, and that's always been something really emotional for me too. My mom was a journalist for a local paper. My stepdad just crossed 40 years with the local paper that he works for in Florida. And so I've always just, I've always been in awe, and I've been a poll worker. And so voting by mail this year, I'm a little bummed out, but I think it also offers the opportunity for a lot of people to sit down and not have to worry about how the little marker will work, not have to worry about selecting things on a screen. They can just sit down and do the research right there and mark their ballot. and mail it in.
Well, to that point, actually, I have the first question here. And again, I'd like to invite everybody on in this event to send us in a question in the Q&A function. And I will put them to Jill, or if you have anything for me, I'm happy to answer a question. Not that I've got any great answers, but you know, I can wing it like the best of them. Jill, here's one for you from Dasha. She asks, is there a way to check if our absentee ballots were received?
Yeah, so a lot of states do offer ballot tracking of different there's different mechanisms that they use. A lot of times you'll see like barcodes on your ballot envelope. And so when the US Postal Service scans it, you know, then that triggers a notification to that system. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure exactly which states offer it. I know Florida offers it. I know California offers it. If you go to your state's Secretary of State website, it'll be pretty apparent, you know, track my ballot. You can also go to howto.vote, and there's a lot of information, and your Secretary of State's website will be linked on that page. And so there are a lot of ways to check and see if your absentee ballot has been received.
Dasha asks, if there is a way to do this, do you recommend that we do so?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for the same reason that I just like obsessively check, you know, when my new jeans are going to arrive at home, it's actually, you know, really cathartic, I think, with an absentee ballot to track exactly
what would you do if there's a way to check and they tell you they haven't received it? Then what do you do?
You know, I would contact my local election official. And we have that information on howto.vote as well, and it's also available on the Secretary of State's website. You can also contact help@turbovote.org, and we'll get you the contact information. But there are things like emergency ballots that you might be eligible to vote with. And then, you know, that is a case where there might be an option for you to go to the polls and vote a provisional ballot in person at the polls if that's a safe option for you. And then if they don't receive your absentee ballot, then your provisional ballot will then be counted as your vote. So
there are things you can do, and there are ways to track this.
There are.
Okay. Lizzie asks a question, and it kind of feels like this one might be for me, but you can have a shot at it, Jill, if you want. I'll let you even go first. What sort of responsibility does the media have on election night? How would you like to see their reporting as it reflects in-person and mail-in voting, even for states that are traditionally, historically safe, red or blue? Okay, so I'm the media guy. I got lots of thoughts on that, but you go first, Jill. What do you think?
Yeah, this has been taking up a lot of space in my mind. I have been trying to help people in my circles and my networks set realistic expectations for what they'll receive, for when they'll receive election results. I don't think that the night of the election we'll get the results like we do. I usually kind of like to make an event out of it. And sometimes in previous years, I've thrown parties on election night to sort of just sit around and watch the results. And so that's not something I'm going to do this year because of social distancing, but it's also something that just isn't going to look the same. Frank, I'm actually really curious because you have so much experience with, you know, election reporting. What do you think it's going to look like? It's really unclear to me what it's going to look like, but I do think that we need to set realistic expectations around not having immediate results.
Well, I have spoken with friends and decision makers in television and cable news worlds, and I've been very emphatic about some things that I think they need to do. First thing they need to do is they need to explain to their viewers, and it's principally television because that's where people go on election night, but it's also holds for NPR, it holds for the New York Times and the LA Times and everybody else because all media are live and on all the time now. First thing, they need to set expectations. It's really not election night anymore. It's election week, it's election month. It could be a much longer period of time. And so typically, and over time, people have expected to tune in and watch something and be told who wins by the end, by midnight or whatever. Now we've had experience where that's not the case. I mean, I was covering Bush v. Gore. I was anchoring at CNN in 2000 when we had the disputed election, and there was not a clear winner of that election for a very long time until the Supreme Court ruled, and we went way into unprecedented territories. So the most important thing that I think media need to do is they need to be thoughtful and calm. That's not something they're always very good at. They need to be clear and concise in setting expectations. They need to do that repeatedly, because saying it once isn't enough. People come and go. You can't assume that your audience knows something just because you've done it. And then for those who are on the air on election night, both the substance of what they say, explaining this, and the tone, their tone of voice, their approach is really important. They need to make sure they don't jump to conclusions. They did that actually in some strange way in the midterms just 2 years ago. And it wasn't until the next day that people really realized how big the blue wave was, because a lot of the results came late. So what media most need to do, which is most difficult for them now, is slow down and lower the decibel level and explain clearly to people what's happening, how it's unfolding, and the timing, so that people understand it and they all can set their expectations accordingly.
Yeah, I agree with that. One thing that I've seen too is just helping people understand why it's taking longer, so that we can restore confidence and make sure that people don't lose confidence as time passes.
Well, one of the parts of Lizzie's question that she asked too is, how would you like to see reporting as it reflects in-person and mail-in voting, and even for states that are traditionally safe, red or blue? That's the other thing that the media need to do. They need to really break it down, how the votes are coming in, explain where they came from, and just walk people through this so they understand that this is a tiered voting process. Here's another one for you. This is an anonymous attendee, so they didn't put their name to it, but it's a great question. You said there's been no evidence of voter fraud. What about ballot harvesting and the Omar ballot harvesting fracas in Minnesota? What can you say about voter fraud, Jill, and some of what we've heard about ballot harvesting, which is a strange term actually, but it's one that's being used?
I have to admit, I am not deeply familiar. I obviously have followed this story somewhat, but I have not been watching it as closely. Been a little busy.
Well, what about, you've been very busy. What would you say about voter fraud overall? I mean, what we hear on the one hand for many is that it's rampant, or it could be rampant, or this mail-in invites it. And on the other hand, there's so little of it. I mean, look, New York just fessed up to mailing out 100,000 ballots just a couple of days ago, where there was a mismatch between the names printed on the envelopes and then what people found when they opened it up and actually looked at the ballot inside. So what do we actually know about voter fraud?
Well, the elections that are run, the reason that we have so much nuance across the country is because elections are run differently in each state, and they're run by people. People do make mistakes. I think it's really important to investigate any claim of voter fraud, of course. And I think, individual cases, there is like anecdotal information of, voter fraud. There's people in jail for voter fraud right now. As far as widespread voter fraud goes, or as far as like saying voting by mail, that's, voting by mail with an unsolicited ballot is voter fraud or something of that nature, that is categorically false. And so that's where I kind of draw the line personally. I'm really interested in making sure that all of these cases are investigated. But I think as far as using voter fraud as a way to undermine the integrity of elections as a whole, or undermine people's trust in the institution of elections, I think is disinformation.
I think there's one of the problems and challenges here is there's not a national system for this. Obviously, it breaks out locally. There are secretaries of state, as you point out, in each state and territory, and they're responsible for this kind of thing. But then there are localities, and they've got to get names on ballots too, because there are local ballot initiatives that need to be part of that. And some use machines, and some still use paper ballots. And then there's absentee ballot, and then there's mail-in ballot. I mean, there are layers to this. And as our anonymous questioner just pointed out in a little postscript to this, I don't know about this particular case, but They say that there were 1,000 double ballots, I guess 2 ballots, sent to residents in Fairfax, Virginia. So I don't, and they were mostly Democrat there. I don't know about that. I haven't heard about that one. But I could ask you this, because there is an answer to this. If somebody were to get 2 ballots, or if somebody were to try to vote twice, would they be successful?
No, I'm confident that they wouldn't be successful, especially on like a large scale, some sort of.
It is a crime after all, too.
Right, it is a crime. It's accounted for. And I was talking a little bit about like voting provisionally, and then if they don't receive your absentee ballot, they would count your in-person ballot. And it's those sorts of things that are accounted for using unique ballot IDs. And a lot of people ask about like, why can't we vote online? And one of the reasons why that's really difficult to design a system for that is because everybody should get 1 vote only, but it has to be anonymous. And so that's where, it's difficult to account for that, but election security is taken very seriously, and there are definitely systems in place everywhere to account for people not being able to vote multiple ballots.
Okay, I'd like to bring the students back in, Ruben Roy and Jennifer Garcia. So if you guys unmute your camera and unmute your mic. There's Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer, you back? You with us?
Hello.
Hi there. Ruben, you with us?
Yep.
There we go. Ruben, I want to direct this question to you as a student and as a computer science major, right? Jill and I were talking a little while ago about how innovation and how data collection can be used to restore confidence and to get more engagement. Have you thought about that yourself? How do we put innovation and technology to good work here?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's been on my mind. I think it's been on a lot of people's mind. And I think that, Jill really touched on like the importance of trust. And I really think that that's incredibly important, because for me, probably for you, for a lot of Americans, I think that big tech has kind of shot their silver bullet, so to speak, because they beat to death so hard the tech is good for you and everything in your life so early on, with like, don't be evil, we're trying to save the world. And that just kind of turned out not to be the case. Like, it's pretty extraordinary to me that like Congress, as divided as it is, always unites in bashing big tech. And I think that like a lot of Americans agree on that. So I think like the biggest thing is sort of what Jill said, which is making sure that like your entire tech stack, no matter what it is, whether it's like a machine learning algorithm, whether it's something like getting people registered to vote, et cetera, is built on like a core foundation of trust. That means keeping people's data safe. I know the EU has like a right to be forgotten, so respecting that in the United States if people want to do it, making sure information is stored securely. Like, there are a series of like outlined policy objectives that various companies, various initiatives can follow through on to make sure that people's data is being protected. But at a less technical level, I think it just means prioritizing and recognizing the fact that, people's information, people's data is not, just bits, it's not ones and zeros. It very much is who they are. And it's not something that you can just easily throw around and leverage for advertising if you want to retain that trust.
So Ruben, let me ask you this. I asked Bill earlier, how can we use innovation, right? So let your mind just completely run away with you here and your imagination. What's the most innovative thing that you could imagine, whether it's possible now or not? And then I'm going to ask Jennifer and Jill this question as well.
Wow, what is
make this
innovative?
Yeah, like go for it.
Sure. So I mean, like, I think tying something to like voting and like what we've been talking about, something that like I've been thinking about is how could you like leverage ride sharing platforms more efficiently in order to make sure that like a lot of the more barrier focused objectives that prevent people from voting can be overcome, right?
Jennifer's
so, like,
there. Jennifer's nodding her head. I see you nodding your head. What do you think?
Yeah, I worked at Voto Latino, which is a grassroots nonprofit that is designated, like I had mentioned before, to uplift the Latinx community and civic engagement. And one of the biggest projects that we worked on this summer was actually a partnership with Lyft. That way individuals could get a discount code, or I think it was like a $30 credit to get a ride to and from the polls, because like Ruben was saying, that is a really huge barrier that unfortunately a lot of people face, and it shouldn't be that way. Like, people shouldn't be able to vote simply because they aren't able to reach the polls. So it's definitely in the works, at least in that nonprofit.
And Jill, what do you think of the magic wands we just heard? Is this where is this how we can put innovation to work?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of times when I think about innovating for the voting system in the US, I think a lot about the reality that our democracy wasn't really designed for everyone to participate. And it was only 55 years ago that Black Americans gained full access to the right to vote, that white men have held for 244 years and white women have held for 101 years. And so, I didn't become personally familiar with the systemic flaws in our voting system until I got into community organizing as a young adult. And that's because I do hold a lot of privilege as a white, cis, able-bodied woman. And so when I think about what is like the best innovation that we can have, a lot of it comes back to how can we sort of go back in time a little bit and solve for these like systemic, deep-rooted issues with the solutions that we design. And so helping people overcome barriers and helping make the electorate more representative. That's one of my focuses. Also, rides to the polls, big fan of that idea. Let's talk about how to do that nationwide for sure as well.
There are some states like Oregon where everybody does mail-in, and that's part of the territory. And there's a kind of a uniform approach, and it's worked reasonably well. There are countries that require you to vote and that actually ding you on your taxes or something if you don't. So there are other things that we could be doing. I just want to come for some closing thoughts to you, Jennifer, and to Ruben. You've heard this conversation. You are student leaders in this space. You are imaginative, innovative thinkers. You are our future. I want to tell you, by the way, Jennifer, you mentioned you were a Posse scholar, a very good friend. You were a Posse. You applied to the Posse
finalist
Foundation Fund, and everybody who applies and people who are finalists, they're amazing. So you're in good company, even though you didn't get that scholarship. You got the Cisneros, which is amazing.
Thank you.
I just want to tell you, one of my good friends, her name is Shirley Collado. She's a Posse scholar. She applied. She went to school through Posse, and she's now a college president. She was the first in her family to go to college, and she's now president of Ithaca College. So what we are investing in you and all the students is a whole new generation of leadership. And that's why the vote conversation is so important. So Jennifer, start us off. Your thoughts on this conversation today, the idea of using innovation, using TurboVote, these kinds of things as tools to engage, encourage people to vote.
Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation and honestly being a part of it as well. But, the talk about innovation, as much as I really want there to be that, there needs to be just like, we need to kind of level the playing field a little bit. There's so many issues that are prevalent within so many communities, even like rural communities. Like my county doesn't have an absentee drop-off ballot, like a designated place to drop off our absentee ballots.
You don't have, no, your county does not have a place for people to drop off? So what
I had to go to the post office and like mail it out. And obviously you can drop it off at the Board of Elections, but like it's so much easier to just have a designated place like other places like Seattle and Oregon, as you were saying, that do mail-in voting. And I know that that's becoming an issue in Texas as well. So I honestly think that there's a lot of issues around voter suppression. And I think that we kind of need to start by focusing on that first before we get ahead. But I definitely agree that those kind of like innovative ideas is going to push the younger generation and to want to vote. And I really appreciate the conversation that we had, and it honestly just pushes me more to like want to register more individuals to vote, even though unfortunately the deadline is coming up soon.
Yeah, well, you got time. There's still time.
Yeah.
Ruben,
yeah, but
Ruben, your thoughts?
I mean, I would definitely agree with what Jennifer said. I think that the two sort of big takeaways that I had, the first was the importance of making elections easier to navigate and how TurboVotes has fit into that, but also, I guess, more towards addressing existing barriers, how to make elections easier to access in the first place. And I think that the sort of very easy to use digital interface that TurboVotes offered is something very attractive, and seeing how we can do that with something like, say, obtaining like a voter ID if your state requires it or something like that is sort of a next step. But stepping back, I feel that sort of an application of technology in a sense that's as altruistic and as important universally as something like TurboVotes is something that I hope like a lot more places can kind of follow the model of, because I think that's really important going forward.
All right, I'm going to advertise my last question for you, Jennifer and Ruben. And then, but I'm going to give you a moment to think about it while I go back to Jill for a closing thought. And the last question is going to be this. What are three tangible things that you are going to do between now and Election Day to get your friends and people to vote? What are three different things you would say? How will you reach them? Three things. You each think about that. That's how we'll leave. So we all walk away with what we like to call actionable intelligence. And Jill, I'll come back to you though for a final question on TurboVote. We're in pretty much the home stretch, right? A month. What are you doing, both TurboVote and DemocracyWorks, as we go to the sprint across the finish line?
This week, we're sending notifications about the November election to our over 9 million users, basically saying, these are all your voting options. The election is coming up on November 3rd, and we want to help you get ready. We started sending those on Monday, I think, and we've been sending them throughout the week. Then we'll be listening to people on the help desk, seeing what concerns people have. In another week or so, we'll send another reminder telling people that their ballots are due on X date, or their absentee ballot request forms are due on X date, and then their ballots are due on X date. And so, just continuing to remind people. And then the day before the election, we'll send our final reminder, and that will have information about how you can vote by mail, vote in person, how you can register to vote on Election Day, which is possible in a lot of states in different formats. So really the home stretch for us just looks like hitting send on millions of notifications, which is absolutely terrifying, of course. But I'm confident that the information that we're giving people is accurate.
Your technology is going to hold up through all of this?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen historic traffic this year. One of our partners, Snapchat, just announced yesterday that they have registered 1 million people this year. Wow. With TurboVote. And so I am confident that we'll hold up, and we have a lot of contingency plans if we do need to, send additional reminders or make sure that, we get information, and we have ways to send additional reminders and things like that. So I'm excited about that. But really it's like the Super Bowl for us right now. We're just, we're in kind of that final mile of the marathon. So my hope is that, we've bolstered our infrastructure internally to handle all of this. And my hope is that every single TurboVote user and every single American who is able to do so gets out to the ballot or casts their ballot in the way that works for them.
Okay, so we'll go back to our students now for our inspiring, three tangible things that you plan to do or say, a real statement, to get people out to vote. Jennifer, you lead us off here.
Okay, so my first thing is to reach out to my younger family friend. I actually helped her register to vote whenever she turned 18, like in July. And I just kind of want to touch base on her, whether or not her close circle of friends, because obviously they're in the same age group, if they're registered to vote, if they're eligible. Okay. And then my second thing is to actually check in on my close group of friends to see what their plan to vote is.
And how are you checking in on them? Is that you're going to talk to them? You're going to text them? You're going to...
Yeah, text them. I don't really...
One time until you get an answer, or as many times as it takes to get an answer?
Oh, as many times.
Okay.
No, they're definitely going to respond. But I think it's important to note that, like, in having an actual tangible plan, it makes it so much more easier to, like, go to the, like, either request your absentee ballot, vote early, or go November 3rd. Like, it's just so much easier whenever you have a designated time and space for yourself to make that change. And then my last point is to just utilize social media and promote myself as a resource for others. That way, they can get, because, like, honestly, it is kind of complicated trying to register to vote or, like, trying to request an absentee ballot. And so being somebody who's gone through that, I feel like it'd be easier for, you know, close friends or even just like friends of mine to reach out to somebody like me.
Okay, I've got 3 good tangible things: your family, your friends, and your social media. Ruben?
Yeah, so I think for me, the first thing is, you know, especially sort of in the era of Zoom University, I think like connecting with either people who you haven't chatted with in a while from your hometown or just people who you haven't gotten to see in person is something we're all doing. So whenever I get the chance to do that, like I'll kind of end our conversation like 15 minutes before like when we're actually supposed to end. And before I used to ask like, are you going to vote? But I think like, especially in recent weeks, that's changed to what's your plan to vote? And I think like that's like always something that's why I kind of leave that extra time there, because, you know, maybe they say like, I'm going to vote, but I don't, you know, I haven't thought about what my plan is. And I mean, I think that's very much like an important conversation to leave some actual time for. Obviously, like we kind of touched on at the beginning of this conversation, there are some people who feel ambivalent about voting, right? They, you know, don't think that like voting is worth it. And something that I've noticed is that, strangely enough, a lot of the people who might not feel super inclined to vote in this election actually have really strong opinions about like important policy issues. So taking the time to point them to, like in California, like propositions, which are literal like policies that like are going to legislature if we vote on them, or, you know, like more local or state type election officials who like might be able to address the issues that they're passionate about, is something that I'll definitely be bringing up to people who might not feel super passionate about voting based off of what they know now. And I think the last thing that I would do is honestly promote events and platforms just like this. We hear a lot about, you know, interest compounds, debt compounds, but I very much do believe that civic engagement compounds, and sort of the door that can be opened for that to start is voting, especially because it can have an impact at so many different levels of governance and in so many different places in our lives and the lives of our collective community.
Well, you're all amazing and brilliant, and thank you very much for the inspiration. I love your question. What's your plan to vote? Because are you going to vote? That's the one I think yeah, maybe I haven't decided. But asking someone, what's your plan to vote, really challenges them to think it through and formulate a response and make a plan, which is what it now takes. You can't just take for granted you're going to be able to walk down the street and pull a lever anymore. And you've got a lot of choices. So thinking it through like that is great. Well, there's an innovative idea to end an innovative conversation about innovation. Jill, thank you so much for everything that you're doing at DemocracyWorks and TurboVote. And Jennifer, thank you very much for all you're doing and speaking up for your community and your family and friends. And we're going to be very interested to track you your next few years at GW. And I look forward to getting to meet you face to face at some point when we can crawl out of our caves here.
Of course. Thank you.
And Ruben, thanks to you and all the work that you're doing with computers. If you can tame them and put technology to work in a positive way, that's one of the greatest contributions that anybody can make right now. So to all of you, thanks very much. To everybody who's joined this on behalf of everybody at GW and the Nashman Center, thank you. And, you know, be in touch with your networks and get everybody to vote. You vote, and to help everybody formulate their plan to vote. So see you all, and have a great day and a good week.